They call me the last of the Romans, a bitter title for a man who has spent more time on the steppes than in the palaces of Ravenna. My story did not begin in the Senate, but in the leather tents of the Huns. Rome no longer defended itself with citizens, but with diplomacy and hostages. I was sent to the court not as a punishment, but as an investment. There, while sharing a tent with the young Attila, we forged a friendship. We forged a common language of war. We ate the same raw meat, shared the same freezing wind, and learned together the art of archery. We were friends, or as close as two wolves can ever be. I learned the logistics of his supplies, and the psychology of his lightning strikes. Attila was, for decades, my most valuable military resource. But in the politics of the frontier, an ally who becomes too strong is simply an enemy who hasn't attacked yet. Before being the Scourge of God, Attila was my greatest asset. I understood that his cavalry was the most lethal force in the known world. For years, we were not enemies. Attila and I were partners. His mercenaries allowed me to stabilize Gaul, crushing the Burgundians, and keeping the Visigoths at bay. Under his command, the Huns forged the vastest empire the world had ever seen. A red stain, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Rhine. We were two powers sustaining a balance of terror, until Attila decided that Rome was no longer a partner, but a prey. After the death of his uncle, Rugula, he was no longer the boy I rode with. He had become a ruthless strategist, who spoke our Latin only to detect our weaknesses. In 445, to consolidate his throne, he disposed of his brother, Bleda. It was a necessary purge, to unify the tribes under one absolute command. The balance of power on the steppe shifted. Attila understood that co-regency was a vulnerability. His elimination was not an outburst. The man who was once my playmate was now a sovereign who shared the world with no one. They say he found the ancient sword of Mars in a meadow, and from that moment, I knew our old friendship would be worth no more than a handful of dust, if it stood in his way. With total control, Attila stopped being a contractor and became our greatest competitor. The supposed marriage proposal from Honoria was only the casus belli he needed to claim Western territory. Attila didn't come for love, he came for the liquidation of the empire. Many believe the fall of Rome was a single-day event, but Attila had us cornered long before our great battle. His raids in the Balkans had left the east without an army, and the west without granaries. Aquileia, Milan, and Pavia were wiped from the face of the earth. Attila reached the gates of Rome, and the world held its breath. There, the inexplicable happened. The man who had sworn to destroy us turned back. Legend says Pope Leo I convinced him with divine words, but we generals, we know the truth. Northern Italy was so devastated by his own campaign, that there was not a single grain of wheat left to feed his horses. His army, decimated by hunger and plague, could not sustain a siege. Logistics, and not the Goths, saved Rome that day. Spring of 451. Military intelligence was dire. Attila advanced with a massive confederation. Huns, Ostrogoths, and Gepids. My response was purely logistical. Without enough regular legions, I had to negotiate a coalition with the Visigoths. The sound of hooves in the camp wasn't nervousness, it was the rhythm of a military machine running out of time. If the coalition failed in Gaul, Rome's logistical center would collapse before the year's end. The meeting with Theodoric was a calculation of risks, under the rain. No hugs, only conditions. The Visigoths knew that if Rome fell, they were next on Attila's list of extermination. The pact was a contract of mutual survival. I granted them tactical sovereignty, in exchange for their heavy cavalry. The air felt heavier than my armor. Attila advanced with 500,000 men. The same people who once called me friend, now came to slit my throat. I remember the rhythmic sound of my horse's hooves, an echo of the nervousness of a crumbling empire. If I couldn't convince my old enemies to fight my old friend, Rome would die before next winter. Then came the storm. I met with Theodoric, under a downpour that seemed like the weeping of the gods. I had to use every ounce of my knowledge to prove that Attila was an existential threat. There, with the map soaked, we signed a blood pact. I promised him lands. I promised him glory, but in the back of my mind, I only saw Attila's face. Chalons was the ultimate butchery. The sky turned black with arrows. It was the last great charge of the empire. I saw Theodoric fall in the mud, and for a moment, my eyes met Attila's through the chaos. The Huns retreated, for the first time. We won. Chalons was not a heroic battle. It was a massive war of attrition. Theodoric died fulfilling his part of the contract. At the end of the day, Attila was surrounded. But I made the strategic decision not to annihilate him. My generals didn't understand, but I did. I couldn't destroy the man who taught me who I am, nor did I want to leave the Visigoths without an enemy to keep them in check. Balance was my only victory. In geopolitics, a weakened enemy is sometimes more useful than a victorious ally. I allowed Attila to retreat, to maintain the balance of threats. Attila died shortly after, choked by his own blood. His empire vanished, but mine paid me with treason. My own death was equally efficient. Emperor Valentinian decided to eliminate the only general who could overshadow him. He stabbed me in the palace, destroying the last command structure capable of holding the West. What irony, to survive the fury of my best enemy, only to die at the hands of the man to whom I gave 30 years of my life. I am Flavius Aetius. We saved the world. But we only managed to make the silence take a little longer to arrive. Here is where the history you know breaks. Everything could have been different. What if Attila hadn't made that logistical error? What if he hadn't listened to the Pope, but to the hunger of his warriors? Welcome to the Europe that never should have existed. In your history, the Catalonian plains were his break, in mine, they were his altar. That June afternoon, the rain didn't put out the fire, it only turned it into steam and blood. My coalition broke before noon. Theodoric didn't fall charging, he fell fleeing. And with his flight, Rome's left flank disappeared, under a tide of Hunnic arrows. There was no balance. There was exterminio. I was left alone in the mud, watching the banners of Rome being trampled by riders I myself had trained. No glory. Just the end of an era. With my head on a pike, there was no longer a wall to stop the wolf. Attila didn't sack Rome to leave, he sacked it so that no one would ever live in it again. He ordered the aqueducts torn down, and the fields burned. Europe ceased to be a map of cities, and became a map of nomadic routes. Latin, law, philosophy, all buried under the manure of the horses. Gaul became the Western satrapy. Roman aristocrats traded their togas for leather. Christianity took refuge in caves, while steppe shamans sacrificed horses on the altars of St. Peter. In the year 1000 of this world, there are no cathedrals. There are no kings. Only khans. We are a nation of riders. The center of the world moved from the seven hills to the banks of the Volga. The Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance, these are concepts this world will never know. Here, the only technology is the composite bow. And the only law is the strongest. Constantinople became a marble island in an ocean of arches. The dome of Hagia Sophia was crowned by the standard of the Hunnic falcon. The last lighthouse of civilization went out because I couldn't hold the candle at Chalons. I am Flavius Aetius, the man who failed at the last frontier. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell in a June afternoon, because a general could not foresee that his friend Attila was willing to burn the entire world rather than share it. May the gods keep you, if there are any left listening.